So hopefully slides. Okay, so really quickly, the topic is make more stuff. And the topic kind of simplifies to a few questions. And a few people today have spoken about like us building our own platforms, our own software companies. And the question I have here is, where are our unicorns? Like, where are our Muslim big software companies? Why don't we have them yet? And so the question becomes, why don't we start great software companies? Like, why haven't we till now? And I've got a few theories on it, and I'll spend the next 20 minutes telling you some of them. So first, some caveats and warnings. The first thing, the good thing is, mostly I'm just a bag of other people's quotes. So if nothing else, I'll have like 3 links in the talk that are really worth watching. So even if the rest of my talk is complete junk, you'll get value. If you follow those links, it'll be good for you. The second thing is, we've only got 20 minutes. That's barely enough time to do anything. So I'm going to speak quickly and rush through it. And you can catch me on Twitter to tell me why I'm stupid, or you can catch me in the hall to tell me why I'm wrong. The next thing is that some of the stuff will sting. Like, lots of the talks have been really positive. My talk will hurt a little bit because it's a little bit introspective. The third thing is, we're not going to solve all the problems. There's enough blame to go around. And we've only got 20 minutes. So like I said, if you're talking about why we don't create great software companies, there's some blame for universities, there's some blame for local government, and for this talk, I'm giving both of them a get-out-of-jail-free card. What I'm interested in is the people in this room. Why don't we build great software companies? Now, one of the things that come up super often, and came up just 2 talks before, is VC investment. Whenever you ask tech people, why aren't you all building great companies? They'll say it's because it's not Silicon Valley and we don't have that venture ecosystem, and here's why the venture ecosystem is needed. For me, it doesn't make sense on a whole bunch of levels. One being, software is probably the highest margin business in the world. It's crazy to me that we've taken the highest margin business in the world and made it so that we can only make a success of it if someone invests a whole lot of money and we first give everything away for free. That's just a stupid way to do business. Secondly, just empirically, if you look at some of the great software companies today, they didn't raise a lot of money. Microsoft, value 3 trillion, raised $1 million. Apple, 3.4 trillion, raised 3 million. MailChimp, if you've ever heard of them, sold for 12 billion and raised $0. So raising money isn't what stops us from building great software companies. So why don't we build great software companies? One of the questions that you may wonder is that because our infrastructure is bad. And this question of infrastructure used to worry me for a long time in the early 2000s. Because if you look at some of the early companies that did great work, in 1996, ViaWeb said, let's build software but control it from the internet. In 96, our networks were too terrible to ponder that. In 98, the Google guys said, let's download the whole internet onto our network, onto our campus network, so that we can check out PageRank. We couldn't have because our internet was too slow. In 2005, YouTube said, let's put videos on the internet. And if you remember the internet in South Africa in 2005, it sucked. And so in some ways, we couldn't even think about building those products because we didn't live in that connected world yet. And that genuinely does cause a digital divide. But tech is largely equalized. Almost everyone in this room, I'm guessing everyone in this room, has a 5G phone. You've got broadband. If you travel to the States, you probably have better broadband at home here than lots of people do in the States. So it's not because of tech. And if you have a laptop, you probably have a shiny MacBook. You probably build on AWS the same way Netflix does. You read the same O'Reilly books. You've got access to the same MIT courseware. so why aren't we building the same great software companies? Okay, and I'll put forward two reasons. The one is, along the way, we've gotten distracted. And the other is, we've kind of been colonized. And I'll hit both of them. In some ways, the answer was already covered back here when we talked about tech equalizing. Because we got all this tech, and instead of using our new internet to build the next YouTube, we spent all our time on Instagram. Literally, we ended up with supercomputers in our pocket, and we use it to play Angry Birds. Okay, so we just stopped doing building stuff when it mattered. A few years ago, Neil Postman wrote this thing where he compared Huxley's A Brave New World and Orwell's 1984. And someone put it into comic form, but it's so great and it maps to us so well. Because Postman says that Orwell feared there were those people who'd ban books. But in A Brave New World, Huxley showed that nobody would need to ban books because we'd be so distracted we wouldn't read books anymore. That Orwell feared there'd be people who'd deprive us of information, but Huxley feared that there'd be so much information we'd be reduced to egotism, passivity. Orwell feared we'd become a captive culture. Huxley feared we'd become a trivial culture. And a trivial culture, like, it cuts deep because in many ways, it's what we've become. Orwell feared that what we hate would ruin us, and Huxley feared that what we love would ruin us. And he's got this ending that says that even the people who are on the lookout for tyranny failed to take into account our infinite appetite for distractions. Okay, and you'll notice with that stuff, again and again, it's really easy to be distracted and not actually build stuff. I was going to start this talk with a show of hands for who posted on Instagram recently versus who actually wrote a blog post or committed something to GitHub. And we are the tech people, like we came to a tech conference, but you'll find consuming so much easier than actually producing stuff. I'm not going to go too much into this question of being colonized, in part because there's not enough time. But it's really interesting. Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz, one of his books is on creating company culture. And in it, he talks a lot about Toussaint Louverture, who led the first successful slave revolution ever. And part of why he talks so much about Louverture is, I didn't know this till the book, it turns out that slave revolutions are really hard to be successful because you don't just take slaves' freedom away, you take away their ability to trust other people. So even after they're free, you've changed how they interact with people, and it makes them really hard to build a successful culture. And in many ways, you find that we do this when it comes to producing stuff on the internet. There's a part where we think it can't be done, we think we can't do it, and then we think people who look like us can't do it. I can tell you, so we're a small software company, we build a product here in South Africa. We're fortunate, we've got customers on all 7 continents, but most of our South African customers don't even know we're a South African company because we don't sell in South Africa. Because if you go to a South African company, they assume you probably can't do it. While LinkedIn happily use us, and Slack use us, and Airbnb use us, you go to a local South African company, and mostly they'll have advice for you on what you should do differently, because that's how we think about stuff. I've got this whole thread on what makes Silicon Valley different, and lots of people talk about their attitude of fail fast and how it works. But one of the things is that in Silicon Valley, they know that startups make junk software because all software starts off as junk software and iterates and gets better. But they give that room for it to grow, and normally we don't. And it's a whole different topic on something we should do more of if we want to see these ecosystems thrive. But I want to focus more on us. And one of the things we have to do, if we're talking about why we don't make great software companies, is be honest with ourselves. So here's one of those good links. If nothing else, if you haven't read it, after this talk, during this talk, like it's better than my talk, Richard Hamming gave this talk called You and Your Research. It was given a long time ago. There's a link down there and the slides will be available. But when he gave this talk, he was giving this talk to a crowd at AT&T, and he was talking to them about how to do what he called first-class work, how to do Nobel quality work or Fields Medal quality work. And you should read this. Like, you should read it several times a year. It's life-changingly good. In it, Hamming talks about a whole bunch of things, how to pick your research areas, work-life balance. He even gives marriage advice. But I'm not going to have time for all of that, so today I'm going to talk about just two things. And the first one, you'll notice Hamming talks about how he did the study of doing great work. And he says he worked on the Manhattan Project. He worked with Feynman, with Beth, with Fermi. And he says he saw that he was there to fix their computers, and they were there to invent the bomb. And he says he saw he was just a stooge. Like he wasn't where he wanted to be. And so he went back and made a whole bunch of changes and worked a whole bunch of ways. But it's super interesting that he starts with the self-reflection that goes, listen, like I see greatness. I see these people doing stuff, and I'm not doing it. And I can't keep doing what I'm doing and expect to be them. If I want to be them, I need to change what I'm doing. There's an interesting phenomenon in South Africa, and even with lots of us in this group, where if you talk to South Africans and if you talk to our Muslim tech folks, almost everyone thinks they could have been a Zuckerberg if they just had the chance, if something was just a little bit different. And if you ask them on a good day, they'll give you advice on what Apple should do and what Google should do and what Zuckerberg should do. When Zuckerberg was in high school, he released a program that he wrote that linked his computer and his dad's computer at the dentist's office so they could talk to each other. When he was still in high school, he released a music player called Synapse, which used machine learning to generate your music based on what you've listened to. When he went to university as a sophomore, he released CourseMash, which allowed people to choose their courses. Then he released FaceMash, and then he created Facebook. If you're wondering why you haven't created Facebook, it's probably because you've not released a Synapse and a FaceMash and a CourseMash. Okay? You've got to be putting stuff out. It's just how it works. And we talk about it like we could. Look at anyone who's done great stuff. Steve Jobs, you look at his story and you'll find they were selling blue boxes, he and Wozniak, before they even went to university. It's something you do. There's a really good product manager called Shreyas. He worked at Stripe, he worked at Google, and he had a fireside chat in India recently. And much like how I'm speaking here, he was speaking to a whole bunch of his people. And at some point, he kind of deadened the room because he said to them, what are you world class at? And he said, no, not what are you good at? Like, what are you world class at? And he made the point, and it's interesting to note that lots of people don't even know what world class looks like. Because they're not stretching themselves and not putting themselves out there. And it's one of those things that you've just got to do. Back to Hamming's essay, Hamming talks about how lots of people, when it comes to doing good work, they kind of shy to even say, I want to do great work. They say culturally, you kind of avoid saying something like that. It sounds grandiose, but you're not going to do it unless you actually want to, because it involves a whole bunch of sacrifice, and you have to actively say, yep, I want to try to do great work. I'm going to put myself down for that. Let's make that happen. The other thing from his essay that I want to talk about, because it comes up often when you meet our people at conferences like this, is people say, I took the courses, I can Python, I can Node, I can JavaScript, but I don't know what to build. Like, I'm waiting for that big idea, that thing. And again, Hamming covers it kind of accidentally. And he's talking here about how lots of scientists, after they become famous, they stop being able to invent great things because now they can only work on great things. And he points out that to get great ideas, you've got to work on small ideas. But it's interesting because it gives us the same thing, which is just build more stuff. Like if you just build lots of little things, those small acorns grow into big oak trees. And in part, you don't just have to build it, you've got to release more of it. And like I've spoken about not consuming, but the thing to note is it's going to be hard. Like releasing stuff, building stuff and releasing stuff is hard. And something that people don't often talk about is your early stuff sucks. There's a really good video, it's a really short video from Ira Glass of NPR. And I think it's like a 2-minute video where he says, look, nobody tells beginners that one of the most difficult things is when you start off, you have your taste, which is good. Like we all know what a good iPhone looks like, what a good Apple experience looks like. And then you write your first program, and it's nothing like that Apple program. He says, and what happens is you have the good taste that tells you that what you wrote isn't good enough, but you don't yet have the skill to be good enough. And he says lots of people stop there. And he says what he wants everyone to know is that everyone goes through that process. And the only way to go through it is just to make more stuff. And at some point, your stuff gets better. And at some point, the stuff you're making equals your taste. And you can do great things. It's just something you have to push through. A few years back, I read this book by Adam Stelzner. It's a great book. So Adam Stelzner led the team that landed the Mars rover, that crazy rover that lands with the skylift. And it's such an amazing book. And if you're interested in tech innovation and tech leadership, you see how they manage the teams at JPL. And it's crazy innovation. And at the end of the book, you genuinely feel sad. Because one of the things you have to realize there is, if you work on physics here in South Africa, if you work on theoretical physics, you're not going to land a Mars rover. It's just our luck. We're not born in the US, and we're not going to work for JPL, so we can't. Like that, you've got to be at JPL if you want to mess with the rover. But that's not the case for software. With software, it's literally the best time ever to be doing stuff. You can make stuff that no one in the world can compete with. If you started building Rust programs today, there's not a lot of people with 10 years more experience than you. If you work on VRKit when Apple releases it, who's got 10 years of experience with VRKit? It released with the last release of WebKit. There's so many things like that we get to start exactly with the rest of the world. There's no reason for us to lag behind anyone. We can just pick it up and do it. In many ways, the world is just so much smaller. I said before, we are a tiny South African company. We've got customers in Antarctica, like on all 7 continents. These days, it's just easier. One of the other interesting things about the internet is so there's the saying that says you're the average of the 5 people or 4 people you hang about with most. The internet means those 5 people don't have to be the 5 people you grew up with or the 5 people in your hometown. You can choose to hang with the smartest people in the world on just about any topic there is. If there's machine learning, like sit on Kaggle, take Andrew Ng's courses. Like there's no reason for us to benchmark ourselves just with locals. You should be competing with the best in the world for everything you do. That stuff, there's just no borders for it. If you make software, you don't need armies of salespeople to sell your stuff anymore. As a company, we do 0 outbound sales. And yeah, it hasn't hurt us at all. Mostly, you just need to step up and do the work. I'll end, there's a quote from someone called Y the Lucky Stiff, who says it pretty perfectly. He says, when you don't create things, you become defined by your tastes rather than your ability. And you see this with us. You see people identify as, I'm an Android guy, I'm an Apple guy, I'm an iPhone guy, I'm an x86 guy. What is that? Like, it's a sports team. Like that stuff is just based on our tastes. Instead, what we should be doing is creating, and more goodness will fall after that. Again, I think we're on for the panel. You can give us questions then, or you can @ me at Haroon Meer. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.